No one ever suspected the medic. They never do. He was there to heal, after all. And that was exactly why Friedhelm Voss was allowed so close to the heart of the German war machine. In the winter of 1942, inside a canvas field hospital pitched just beyond the Eastern Front, a German medic stood beneath a single hanging lamp, holding a syringe up to the light. Outside, artillery rumbled like distant thunder. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, damp wool, and fear quietly endured. His name was Friedhelm Voss. To the army he was unremarkable. A Red Cross armband on his sleeve, neat handwriting on medical charts, a calm voice that told frightened boys they would be all right, even when they would not. The men trusted him without question. They rolled up their sleeves. They looked away as the needle slipped into their skin. They never noticed how carefully he watched the fluid move through the glass. Behind him, rows of soldiers lay motionless on cots, breathing shallowly, dreaming of homes they would never see again. Friedhelm moved among them with practiced gentleness, stitching wounds, cleaning infections, whispering reassurances learned by heart. He was everything a wartime medic was supposed to be. What no one saw was that Friedhelm had already chosen his side. He was not a soldier in the traditional sense. He carried no rifle. He did not sabotage bridges or pass coded messages through dead drops. He healed the men the Reich needed most, and that was precisely why no one ever questioned him. Kindness, he had learned, was the perfect disguise. Before the war, Friedhelm had been a medical student, careful, methodical, obsessed with the invisible forces that could destroy a body from the inside. He understood infection, incubation, the way something microscopic could topple something vast. And when the war took everything he loved, that knowledge did not disappear. It sharpened. Each week, officers arrived for routine injections meant to prepare them for deployment, preventative treatments, standard procedure. Friedhelm administered them with steady hands and flawless records. The syringes looked identical. The doses were precise. The men left standing tall, confident, untouched by doubt. Days later, some of them would not be able to stand at all. The illnesses did not kill quickly. They weakened, they confused, they lingered, units slowed, commands fractured. The High Command blamed weather, exhaustion, enemy interference. Anything except the quiet medic who never made mistakes. By the time anyone thought to look closely, the damage was already moving through the ranks. Friedhelm did not begin this as an act of madness or cruelty. It was the result of something older, something that had started years before the war ever gave him a uniform. And to understand how a healer became a weapon, you have to return to the moment when he first learned that saving lives and ending a war were not always opposite goals. If stories like this make your blood boil, if you can't stand the cruelty, the arrogance, the belief that power makes someone untouchable, then take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every like tells the algorithm that these stories matter, and every subscription helps us uncover more moments where quiet people stood up to monstrous systems. And before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story may have happened in one place, but its lesson belongs everywhere. Now you've done that, back to the story. Before the uniform, before the armband and the tent and the syringe held to the light, there was Freiburg. It was a city of narrow streets and old stone, of lecture halls that smelled faintly of chalk and antiseptic. Friedhelm Voss walked those streets with a satchel heavy with books and a mind full of questions that still believed answers could make the world better. He was known among his classmates as careful to a fault, gentle with his hands, relentlessly ethical, the kind of student who stayed late to help others review anatomy, who apologized, half joking, half sincere, when he made the first incision on a cadaver. He believed medicine was a form of service, almost sacred, that to heal a body was to briefly push back against chaos itself. Lieselotte Krenn believed that too. She sat beside him in lectures, her notes meticulous, her questions sharp. Where Friedhelm was quiet and inward, Lieselotte was warm, curious, unafraid to challenge professors who spoke with certainty where none existed. They studied together in cafes and along the Dreisam River, dreaming aloud of clinics they would open, of lives spent easing pain rather than explaining it away. She teased him for his seriousness. He admired her hope. The world around them began to change before either of them could name it. Certain professors disappeared between semesters. Conversations lowered their voices. Academic debates hardened into declarations of loyalty. Posters appeared where notices for lectures once hung. The language of medicine, care, compassion, obligation, was slowly crowded out by words like purity and strength. Then Lieselotte's father was arrested. There were no clear charges, only murmurs of intellectual contamination, of ideas that did not align cleanly enough with the new order. Men in dark coats came at night. Papers were signed under pressure. By morning, his office at the university stood empty, as if he had never existed at all. Lieselotte tried to be brave. She told Friedhelm it would be sorted out. That reason would prevail. One night she did not come home. No witnesses, no body, no official notice beyond a brief, impersonal statement citing a relocation incident. Her name vanished from records. Her apartment was cleared within days. It was as if the city itself had decided to forget her. Friedhelm searched anyway. Hospitals, offices, train stations. He listened for rumors and learned how quickly people learned not to speak. Grief without a body has no edges. It seeps into everything. There was no grave to kneel beside, no ritual to end the waiting. Something inside him fractured. Not loudly, not all at once. It simply stopped reaching for the future. When the conscription papers arrived, he did not argue. He did not resist. He folded his life into a single suitcase and reported for duty as a medic. Not out of loyalty, not out of belief, out of numb surrender. And as he put on the uniform for the first time, Friedhelm Voss understood that some losses are never buried, and that the dead do not always stay behind. The war hospital became a place of routine, and Friedhelm learned that routine was power. Canvas walls flapped in the wind. Stretchers arrived at all hours. Blood, mud, and fear blurred together until they were indistinguishable. Friedhelm moved through it with quiet efficiency, his hands steady, his voice low. He stitched wounds cleanly. He found veins others could not. He remembered names when most did not bother to ask. Word spread quickly among the soldiers. If you were hurt, ask for Voss. If you were afraid, sit near Voss. If you thought you might die, let Voss be the one who stayed. They spoke to him in fragments and confessions, about letters from home that smelled faintly of soap, about mothers who wrote too often or not at all, about sweethearts who promised to wait. Some asked him to remember a name just in case. Others asked him to burn a letter they did not want found. Friedhelm listened. He never rushed them. He never judged. He learned how fragile men became when pain stripped away the armor they wore for one another. The officers noticed him only as an asset, a reliable function. His records were flawless, his demeanor calm. He did not ask questions. He did not linger in their presence unless instructed. To them he was background noise. the soft hum of a machine that kept soldiers operational. That invisibility became his shield. At first, the rumors were faint. A delayed inspection here, a unit reassigned there, a commander who collapsed during a briefing, pale and shaking, removed quietly and replaced without ceremony. The explanations were always the same: stress, exhaustion, the brutal climate of the front. No one said Friedhelm's name. At night, when the lamps dimmed and the groans softened into uneasy sleep, he remained awake. He scrubbed his hands at a rusted basin until the skin split and burned. Water pooled at his feet. He watched it darken, then clear again, then darken once more. He counted faces in his mind. Not victories, not units weakened or advances slowed. Faces. The young artillery officer who thanked him too sincerely. The logistics captain who spoke proudly of efficiency. The medic who joked to hide his fear. He told himself the same sentence night after night, like a vow that might still save him from himself. If I cannot stop the war, I can slow its heartbeat. Trust was the true instrument. The needle was only a formality. They trusted his calm hands. They trusted the kindness in his eyes. They trusted the red cross on his sleeve and the careful way he spoke their names. And because they trusted him, they never saw the danger standing inches away, quiet, unremarkable, and already inside the rhythm of their days. It did not happen all at once. First, a battalion failed a routine inspection. Too many men reported dizziness. Too many could not stand for long without swaying. The officers blamed poor rations and harsher nights. The paperwork was amended. The unit was delayed. Then another battalion stalled, and another. Across the front, formations that looked intact on paper began to sag in reality. Men arrived at mustering points, pale and sweating, uniforms hanging looser than they should have. Some tried to hide their weakness, embarrassed by bodies that refused to obey. Others stopped trying altogether. The illness did not arrive like a storm. It lingered. It crept into joints and lungs, into concentration and pride. It left men alive but diminished, unable to march, unable to command, unable to pretend that willpower alone could hold them upright. There were no heroic deaths, no clean endings, just a slow erosion that turned strength into liability. Friedhelm watched the pattern emerge the way one watches a tide come in, quietly, unwillingly, unable to deny it. He never smiled. He never marked time by victories. He noticed instead the silences, the way officers stopped boasting, the way briefings shortened, the way fear replaced certainty in voices that had once been sharp with command. The high command grew restless. Orders were rewritten. Medical staff rotated and interrogated. Supplies were inspected, then re-inspected. Someone had to be responsible. Someone always did. Scapegoats were found. Clerks, quartermasters, prisoners, civilians. None of it helped. Paranoia spread faster than understanding. One afternoon, Friedhelm was called into a tent he had never entered before. Two officers sat across from him, their expressions stiff with suspicion. They asked about his procedures, his training, his records. He answered calmly, truthfully. His documentation was perfect. His superiors vouched for him without hesitation. After 20 minutes, he was dismissed. As he stepped back into the open air, he realized his hands were trembling, not with fear of discovery, but with the knowledge of how close the war now pressed against him, how large the thing had grown. The momentum of the campaign slowed. Timetables slipped. Decisions were postponed. Orders contradicted one another. The enemy did not strike harder. The German army simply struggled to move at all. Friedhelm began to understand the scale of what he had set in motion. He had not shattered the machine. He had unbalanced it, taken away its certainty, made it heavy with its own weight, and in doing so he felt no triumph, only a growing, suffocating dread. This was power without banners, without applause, without the relief of believing oneself righteous. And as the war staggered forward on weakened legs, Friedhelm Voss feared not only discovery, but what it meant to carry such quiet destruction inside his own hands. Otto Brandner arrived with an escort and a reputation. Decorated, efficient, rising quickly through the ranks. His uniform carried the quiet authority of someone the war seemed to favor. When he stepped into the hospital tent, officers straightened without realizing they had done so. Friedhelm recognized him instantly. The voice came. First, confident, familiar, unchanged by years of command. Then the smile. Broader now, harder at the edges, still unmistakable. "Friedhelm?" Otto said, disbelief giving way to delight. Of all places. For a moment the war receded. They spoke of Freiburg, of lecture halls and late nights bent over textbooks. Otto laughed about how Friedhelm used to argue with professors over ethics, while everyone else worried about exams. Friedhelm remembered a friend who once believed medicine was above politics. Otto embodied what Friedhelm might have become. He had chosen the uniform willingly, chosen advancement, chosen certainty. Where Friedhelm had lost everything quietly, Otto had gained clarity, purpose, recognition. The reunion was warm and dangerous. Otto joked about the weakness he'd seen at the front, about men who could not keep up. Sacrifice, he said lightly, as if the word weighed nothing. Necessary inefficiency. War trims the soft. Friedhelm listened as he prepared the syringe, routine motion, familiar steps, the same calm precision that had carried him through countless injections. Otto rolled up his sleeve without hesitation, still talking, still smiling. Their eyes met. Something shifted. Just for a fraction of a second, Otto hesitated, not in fear, recognition, a flicker of memory passing between them, late nights, shared ideals, a life that might have unfolded differently. Friedhelm's hand paused. The choice was there, sudden and unbearable. Consistency or mercy, the logic of the system he had built, or the remnants of a friendship he had never buried. He chose mercy. The syringe delivered nothing more than what the records would later show. Standard, clean, harmless. Otto clapped him on the shoulder afterward. "You were always the best of us," he said, meaning it as praise. "Too good, sometimes." They parted with a promise to talk again, a promise neither of them believed. That night Friedhelm could not wash his hands. Enough. He understood what he had done, not just spared a life, but broken his own pattern. Mercy was not invisible. Mercy left ripples. Otto was observant, intelligent, loyal to a cause Friedhelm no longer recognized. As he lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of war, Friedhelm felt something colder than fear settle in his chest. Mercy, he realized, might cost him everything. Otto did not accuse him, not directly. He spoke instead of inconsistencies, of patterns that did not sit right, of numbers that looked clean individually but strange when laid side by side. He framed it as concern, for the Army, for efficiency, for the integrity of the medical corps. He asked questions in the careful way intelligent men do when they are afraid of the answers. Friedhelm did not hear about it until the night the guards came. There was no shouting, no spectacle, a hand on his shoulder, a quiet order to follow. The tent behind him continued its rhythm of pain and murmured prayers as if nothing had changed. In a way, nothing had. The interrogation room was small and bare. The questions were precise. Why certain units? Why certain officers? Why now? Friedhelm answered what he could. His training, his procedures, his records. When the questions edged closer to intent, to motive, he stopped speaking. Not from bravery, but from fatigue. He could not explain something that had grown out of absence and grief and waiting without end. They pressed him gently at first, later, less gently. Still, he said nothing. In the silence, memories rose uninvited. Liselotte's smile as she bent over her notes, the nervous laughter of students who believed knowledge could protect them, the weight of dying soldiers' hands in his, trusting him with their last moments. He saw faces, not consequences. Days passed, or nights. Time lost its shape. The war continued without him. Orders were still delayed. Units still faltered. Commanders still fell ill at moments that mattered. Whatever Friedhelm had started no longer required his presence. The machine stumbled on, damaged beyond easy repair. That was the irony that hollowed him out. When he finally understood Otto's role, it came without bitterness. Otto had not betrayed him out of hatred. He had done it out of fear. Fear that the war he believed in was rotting from within. Fear that the man he once admired had become something he could not name. Mercy had been the fracture Otto could not ignore. By sparing him, Friedhelm had forced him to look too closely, to notice, to doubt. And doubt, in this war, was more dangerous than any illness. As Friedhelm sat alone, stripped of purpose and position, he realized the final truth too late. Kindness had made him invisible. Mercy had made him seen. And that more than anything he had ever done was the price he could not escape. The war did not stop. It simply lost its rhythm. Offensives were announced with confidence and postponed with excuses. Timetables stretched, then collapsed. Entire operations dissolved into administrative confusion before a single shot was fired. Maps were redrawn so often that the ink smeared into uncertainty. Supplies arrived where they were no longer needed. Fuel sat untouched. Ammunition rusted in crates. Trains idled on tracks waiting for units that could not assemble fast enough to board them. The machinery of war, built for momentum and precision, began to grind against itself. Officers rotated endlessly. One would fall ill days before a major decision. His replacement would arrive exhausted, unfamiliar with the terrain, already behind. Authority became temporary, confidence brittle. Orders were followed carefully, then cautiously, then not at all. No one could point to a single cause. There was no enemy breakthrough to explain it. No decisive battle lost. Just a growing sense that the war was slipping, not backward, but sideways, bleeding time and strength without spectacle. Friedhelm Voss watched none of this directly. By then he had been reduced to a file number, then to an absence. His name was removed from duty rosters. His records were sealed, amended, or quietly discarded. In official histories he became a disciplinary note, then nothing at all. The war moved on without him, and yet it moved differently because of him. The illness continued its quiet work long after his hands were restrained. Men recovered slowly, incompletely. Some returned to duty weaker than before. Others never did. The army adapted, but adaptation costs time, and time was the one resource the war could not afford to lose. Friedhelm came to understand that his influence no longer required his presence. It had detached from him, become systemic. He was irrelevant in the way a match becomes irrelevant once the fire has spread. That realization brought an unexpected calm. He had once imagined resistance as something dramatic, a moment, a stand, a final act that would justify everything that came before. Instead, what he had done dissolved quietly into outcomes and delays and missed chances that no one could trace back to a single man. History would record none of it. There would be no medals revoked in his name, no speeches condemning him, no acknowledgement that a medic barely noticed had altered the tempo of a war designed to crush entire continents beneath its certainty. And Friedhelm accepted this. He understood now that visibility had never been the point, that the most lasting forces rarely announce themselves. They seep, they accumulate, they change what comes next without leaving fingerprints behind. In the silence of confinement, he thought of Liselot, not as she vanished, but as she once was, speaking earnestly about medicine as service, about helping people who would never know your name. He wondered if she would have understood. He hoped she would have. The war fractured not with explosions, but with inefficiency. And as it staggered forward, burdened by its own weight, Friedhelm Voss made peace with the truth that would outlive him. Some victories are never claimed. Some sacrifices are never recognized. And some of the most decisive acts in history belong to people who disappear so completely that the world forgets there was ever a choice at all. The morning came without ceremony. Gray light settled over the yard, thin and indifferent, as if the sky itself wished to avoid the moment. Friedhelm Voss stood where he was told, hands bound, coat hanging loose on a body that had already begun to recede from the world. He felt neither fear nor relief, only a quiet attentiveness, the same focus he once brought to a bedside at dawn. Boots shifted, rifles were checked, orders were murmured, then repeated more softly. It was then that the young orderly saw him. He stood apart from the others, barely 19, his uniform too new, his face too open for what the war demanded. His eyes narrowed, searching, then widened. "It's you," he said, before he could stop himself. The words carried farther than he intended. Heads turned. Someone frowned. The boy swallowed and stepped closer, voice shaking. "You're the medic," he said. "From the tent, by the tree line." Friedhelm met his gaze. Recognition came gently, like a memory surfacing from sleep. "Yes," he said. The boy's breath caught. "You stayed with me," he whispered. "When the shrapnel, when they thought I wouldn't last the night." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You held my hand. You talked about Freiburg, about the river. You told me to breathe." Friedhelm nodded. He remembered the boy's fever, the way pain had made him small and frightened. He remembered choosing not to leave when others had. The orderly's eyes shone. I thought you should know." For a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. The war, the charges, the years of quiet destruction fell away, replaced by something simpler and truer. Friedhelm smiled. It was the first time in years that the gesture reached his eyes. "Then I did something right," he said. The officer cleared his throat. Time resumed its forward motion. The boy was gently guided back, his steps unsteady. He did not look away. The men raised their rifles. Some stared at the ground. One closed his eyes. Another tightened his jaw as if bracing against a cold wind. Friedhelm stood still. He thought of Liselotte, not as a loss, but as a presence. He thought of hands he had held, of fear eased for a moment, of pain shared so it would not be borne alone. He understood now that this, too, was a kind of medicine. The command was given. When it was over, there was no triumph, no release, only a silence that settled heavily, like dust after a long collapse. The boy made a sound he did not recognize as his own. Someone else turned away, suddenly ashamed of breathing. The body was removed, the yard emptied, the day went on. But for those who had witnessed it, those who had seen a condemned man offer peace instead of bitterness, something lingered. Not a story they would tell aloud, but a quiet weight carried forward. And in that silence, compassion endured. Decades later, the war existed mostly in archives. Borders had shifted. Cities had been rebuilt with clean lines and careful plaques. What had once been a field hospital was now a forgotten scar of earth beyond a tree line, uncovered only because a new road required old ground to be disturbed. Workers found fragments first: rusted bed frames, shattered glass, a collapsed section of canvas fused to soil. Nothing remarkable, just debris from a war that had left debris everywhere. Then they found the box. It was metal, dented, sealed more by neglect than intention. Inside were remnants that had survived because no one thought they mattered. A few medical instruments, a cracked mirror, and beneath them, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, a photograph. The image was simple. A man in a medic's uniform stood inside a tent, a surgical mask pulled halfway down his face. He held a syringe up to the light, studying it with an expression that was neither clinical nor cruel. His eyes were hollow, yes, but also impossibly gentle, as if sorrow itself had learned restraint. On the back of the photograph, written in neat, deliberate script, were 6 words: "I healed what I could not save." The historians catalogued it, dated it approximately, filed it alongside thousands of similar artifacts recovered from forgotten corners of the war. No name accompanied it. No context survived that could anchor it to a larger narrative. Some dismissed it as coincidence, others as sentiment. One noted that medics often wrote such things, that war inspired reflection without necessarily inspiring action. The photograph was archived, the box returned to storage. The story ended where documentation failed. But history, as it is written, rarely records resistance that does not announce itself. It overlooks pauses, delays, fatigue, hesitation, the subtle failures that change outcomes without ever appearing intentional. It does not record the cost of trust misplaced, or kindness weaponized, or mercy that alters the course of events without leaving proof. Friedhelm Voss never appeared in textbooks. His name surfaced only once in a damaged ledger, later crossed out and replaced with an empty line. There were no testimonies, no trials worth remembering, no legacy clean enough to celebrate. And yet, the war he touched never moved quite the same afterward. Somewhere between plans and execution, between certainty and collapse, something weakened, something slowed, something failed to arrive on time. That absence was never attributed to him. It couldn't be. Invisible resistance leaves no monument. It survives only in fragments: an unexplained delay, a missed opportunity, a photograph without a caption, and sometimes in a name spoken only once more: Liselot, not in triumph, not in justice, but in the quiet understanding that some answers come too late, and some acts of love endure only as echoes, carried forward by those who never knew who made them possible. The photograph remains in the archive, unremarked, uncelebrated, and unbearably human. This story reminds us that war is not fought only with weapons, uniforms, or orders, but with choices made quietly, often in isolation, and often without recognition. Friedhelm Voss does not fit the image of a traditional hero. He does not conquer, command, or claim victory. Instead, he chooses conscience, inside a system designed to erase it. His resistance is invisible, morally complex, and deeply personal. It asks uncomfortable questions about justice, mercy, and responsibility. It shows that compassion can survive even within structures built on cruelty, and that refusing to become numb may be the most dangerous act of all. History tends to celebrate loud defiance and decisive moments, but this story argues something subtler and more unsettling, that some of the most meaningful acts leave no monuments, no names, and no certainty. Sometimes slowing evil, quietly, imperfectly, at great personal cost, is the bravest form of courage there is. Before you go, take a moment with what you just witnessed. This wasn't a story about victory. It was a story about conscience, about the quiet weight of choices made when no one is watching, about how even in the darkest systems, a single person can refuse to let cruelty be the final word. If stories like this matter to you, stories that uncover forgotten courage, moral struggle, and the human cost behind history, subscribe to the channel. It's how we keep bringing you narratives that don't just entertain, but ask something of us. And don't stop here. On your screen right now is another story, one that goes even deeper, darker, and more thrilling. Click it. Carry this feeling forward. Because remembering these stories is one way we make sure they were not endured in silence.